Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 59 of Circle of Fellows. This is a monthly broadcast featuring usually four IABC fellows and myself as moderator. I'm Shel Holtz. I'm Director of Internal Communications at Webcor, which is a commercial general contractor in California, headquartered in San Francisco, and I'm coming to you from my home office in Concord, California. Our topic today is all about basically setting up and running your own communications consulting practice. And I believe that everybody on the panel today has either done that or is currently still doing it. I had done it for 21 years until 2017 when I went back into the corporate world, but can still talk about it from memory. We are going to take your questions in real time. There are two ways that you can send questions, whatever is easiest for you. One is right there in YouTube. Go ahead and ask your question using the comment feature, the chat feature in YouTube, and the other is using the COF59 hashtag on Twitter. I'm monitoring that hashtag, and we'll pose questions that I get either way. If you go to the YouTube chat, it makes it a little cooler because I can actually display your question on the screen. So please ask questions as they occur to you. What I'd like to do now is ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves. Jim Schaefer, why don't you kick things off?
Thank you, Shel. I'm Jim Schaefer, and I started my consulting career after I was press secretary to the governor of Kansas. I joined Towers Perrin in the Chicago area. I then went back to Washington. They asked me if I would open a communication consulting practice there, which I did. I was with that piece of the organization for 20 years and decided to take an early retirement. Started my own firm about 20 years ago, and it's Jim Schaefer Group, and we focus on helping to improve organizational performance through stronger leaders and more excited, turned-on people.
And we'll go from Jim number one to Jim number two. Jim Lukaszewski.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. My wife and I began our first firm in February of 1978. I'd been in state government for 7 or 8 years, working for a governor and then working in the state departments and stuff. And prior to that, actually, at the age of 34, I graduated from the university here locally. And we had the firm locally in Minneapolis till 1984, roughly. Then we were acquired by a larger firm here because we specialized initially in crisis management, which back then was not the thing that it is today, and media coaching, which was a new thing in that era as well. And the larger firms weren't doing it. I wound up getting all the appointments with the big shots in town to do these. To do the training and the coaching, and so we got acquired by one of the firms, which led to us ultimately going to New York with the Chester Berger firm in 1986. We lived in New York and worked from New York nationally for about 25, almost 30 years. Then my wife retired. We came back here, and she passed away last year. But I still plug away on writing books and working for clients in this area of crisis management and executive leadership recovery. It's been a very interesting practice all these years. I write a lot. I have a big website on crisis management. We all have websites. There's the other Jim helping me. I have a new book out. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, my copy's right up there.
Bless you. And we won't talk about that today, but so I've been busy and still at it. I work from home because I like to all work from home, but it's been a wonderful career.
Great. And up next, Kellie Garrett.
Yes, I'm a recovering executive. I spent 20 years at a farm bank, initially responsible for all things reputation, including marketing and brand, and jumped to start my own business 7 years ago. I'm a certified coach and a certified board director, so I do executive coaching, help executives get out of their own way so that the people below them can shine, never mind the executive themselves. and also do board governance work, primarily helping boards, also senior management teams, with playing nicer in the sandbox. How do you engage in constructive conflict and improve your interpersonal dynamics?
Fantastic. And Jennifer, you are last but not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm based in North Vancouver, Canada, where I have my own storytelling consulting firm, Forwards Communication. Storytelling is something I've been doing for a couple of decades, and before it became a buzzword. So I was thrilled when it sort of became the new black. And by storytelling, I mean I help organizations turn their messages and the actions or reactions they're seeking into stories that employees and their audiences can sort of resonate with. I have lots of things I wish I had done differently along the way as an entrepreneur, and lots of things I'm still learning 25 years in. I'm a very active volunteer, longtime volunteer with IABC, and I've always said that was the equivalent of my leadership MBA in terms of teaching me conflict resolution, juggling financials, all sorts of things that became super useful to me, both with my clients and in my business. So that's me.
Outstanding. So let's kick off the discussion. When I went out on my own, it was 1996. I had spent several years getting very invested in communication technology at a time when a lot of people weren't. Because I was doing talks on that and writing about that, people started calling and saying, "Can you help us with this?" And I would say, "No, the company I work for doesn't do that." It occurred to me that I could leverage all of that. So at the age of 40, with my wife staying home with the kids at that point, I went out on my own. It seems to me that most of the people that I know who have started a consulting practice did it because they lost a job and needed something to do. It wasn't a matter of saying, "Gee, I have this expertise and there's this demand out there and I can probably meet that with a practice of my own." Is that a good reason to start a consulting practice, do you think?
Oh, I think so. I think there are a lot of different ways to start a consulting practice, but oftentimes I've seen some of the best communication consultants who I know did not have a good experience where they were employed and opted out. In my particular case, as I mentioned, I took an early retirement, and it wasn't really, and I wanted to continue to consult because I had a book coming out, The Leadership Solution. And so I wanted to continue to do that. I just wanted it to be all mine. I didn't want to share it with anybody.
My story's a little different. I'd been in government for some years, and I was getting tired of that. And although I loved the work, and we were thinking about just moving and picking up station, going to California. We had some friends out there that we went to high school with, and that sort of thing. And one of the consultants that worked for me in the agency I was heading was. I asked you, we worked to the West Coast too, and he was bringing back for me at my request the green pages, which are the pages where the jobs are listed in California newspapers at that time. And he finally said, "What am I bringing these back for?" And he was a political consultant, and he told me what he said was, when I knew we were going to California, he said, "Well, listen, the problem with my profession of politics is you only eat in even numbered years." And so, but this year I've developed a really good practice. But next year is coming, which was 1978, an election year, and he had all kinds of clients all over the country. So he said, "Why don't we go to business together? And you can do my practice for me while I can keep these clients. Meantime, build your own practice, and then we'll go forward as whatever life gives us." And so that's how it started for me. When I went home and mentioned it to Barbara, who was a dental hygienist, a Swede, and unlike me, a person who could add, subtract, multiply, and divide, she was horrified. And so but she really liked the guy that was working with me. And so he took a chance. It's a longer story, but that's how we got into it. And we worked together actually from 1978 really until 2009 when she retired. So I had really the best of both worlds going forward. And again, she was just an intimate part of the practice and knew everybody and that sort of stuff. So I had this engine with me, helping me stay focused in good times and not so good times.
Oh, great story.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts about who should actually start a consulting firm and who should stay on the client side?
I think one of the important things, I think anyone can do both, and those are suited. You discover after a bit of exploration which is better suited. I think what needs to be clear in someone's mind is how you're defining yourself. So is this just a bridge to the next job? And that's cool. Identify that. I'm consulting while I'm looking. Or is this something that you're actually putting roots down in and intending to still be doing I always say you've got to give it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, etc. From both a client point of view and a fellow consultant point of view, because I hire a lot of those people who are in between gigs or looking to set things up. I think from my perspective, as long as you are clear on what it is your agenda is and what it is the investment you're making, and in defining yourself, it can work very well. Between jobs can be I know lots of serial contractors, for example, and like I said, hire them. The folks who I know who have really made the commitment were prepared for the lean years and the bounty years, both hand in hand.
One of the questions that I was asked frequently while I was independent, people would tell me I'm going to start my own consulting practice. I would say, great, I think there's plenty of room out there for good people. They would say, yeah, I'm really anxious to start this and excited about it. How do I find clients? And when I started my practice, one of the reasons I was able to do it was the clients were there waiting. They had told me, we have work for you if you go out on your own. I also had a contract from Reagan Communications to do a couple of technology-focused newsletters back in '96 when nobody was doing that yet. So, I could keep the roof over the head and the lights on if nothing else emerged right away. But there are still people who are taking this plunge with no clients. First of all, is that a good idea? And second, what is your best advice for finding clients?
Well, I think that's a very challenging question, particularly given what's going on today. In my particular case, I left one firm and essentially started another one that did much the same thing. I had clients, a few clients who came with me. A number of people knew me from the book, The Leadership Solution. And so I never really felt like I had a dip at all as I moved from Towers Perrin to what I was doing. And I still today have very good friends at Towers Perrin. We had good relationships. We had similar clients, FedEx as one. They did work with FedEx, and so did I. They decided they didn't want to. They would prefer that I take on the work that was being done because it was more focused on what I do versus what Towers did. So I think it just really depends on the situation that you have and what you have around you, I think, as to which way to move.
Jim, let me do a follow-up question there. You briefly mentioned the book. Is writing a book a good way to get your name out there so that people would call you and ask about your services, or at least check out your website?
I think, yes, I think it is. I had a situation where when I left Towers Perrin, my book was about ready to come out. And so I not only had some understanding of what a lot of people out there on the Towers side were doing, and at the same time, I was getting some publicity here and there for the things that I was doing. I was doing a lot of speaking at IABC. And so when the book came out, I think it was an extension of what I'd been doing instead of a brand new thing to go into the marketplace.
I published my first book in 1992, and I spent a lot of time on it. I hadn't written a book before, but a trade association had asked me to develop a line of thinking on an issue, and so I developed this book about it. It was only 44 pages, but I spent a lot of time on it. I remember Barbara asking me, spending a lot of time on this book when I should probably be out doing something else, getting clients. And she says, "Are we going to make any money on this?" And I said, "Probably not." And then she said, "This is the sweetest side of her, the beautiful side. Well, then why are we spending so much time on this?" And I said, "Well, my mom's been a librarian for 30 years, and I think she'd like to have a book on her coffee table with her son's name on it." And she never asked me why I was writing, but I've written 15 books since then, why I was writing any books. It's purely something that we have to do when we get it done, and then we decide to do another one, and there's no real reason for it. We're not saving mankind, at least mine. Jim is better at mine at saving mankind, but it's just interesting the sort of how personal book writing turns out to be. So it really is an extension of parts of our personality anyway. People keep talking about writing books, and I presume Jim's experience is similar to mine. You discover if you want to write books, you have to write something every day.
Right.
Talking about it doesn't get anything done. I remember listening to Garrison Keillor one time, and he just had a book coming out, and he talked about it briefly in one of his Saturday programs. And then he interrupted himself and said, "Well, how many of you are thinking of writing the great novel?" And the audience roars. Everybody raised their hand. I wasn't in the studio, but it was radio. But everybody raised their hand. And so he talks a little bit more. Then he interrupts and says, "Well, let me ask you another question. How many have actually started writing your novel?" Again, the audience exploded because nobody raised their hand. So I went a slightly different way. I started publishing on public relations topics in 1974. I was still in government. And what astounded me was people would write back to me and make compliments or ask questions. And I just had no idea at all. I wanted to publish something, so I started doing it. So my career I hate selling so much that I just write constantly, publish constantly, because I think in my mind it avoids my having to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, do you want to buy something from me?" But for most businesses, entrepreneurs, this is what you got to do. You have to get on the phone and call people, write letters, build relationships, and things like that. And then I'm an incredible introvert, despite all the stuff that I do. And so, I mean, it's really hard for me. So I'm doing all these things to avoid talking to people about buying stuff, and it's worked for me most of the time. Interestingly enough, but the books help, no question about it.
Kellie, you came out of a farm bank. I mean, how did you develop a clientele when you went out on your own?
Well, like you, people had started asking me to consult and coach and speak before I left. So I did a lot of speaking in my executive job and started getting asked probably about 10 years before I left if I would also speak externally. So I had a declaration of outside interest with my company, and as long as it wasn't a financial institution, I could take a day off work and go do that. And I started getting more and more calls as well to do coaching once people found out I had gotten that certification. So there was some pull before I left. I was engaged in a bit of credential seeking behavior as my boost to myself in terms of wanting the credibility behind me when I went out. So getting certified as an executive coach included some training on how to start your own business. Really, to me, what gobsmacked me after I did start was the power of reputation. I had not realized how wide my networks were in Canada and the US from the various things I'd done, from volunteering with IABC to speaking all over the place. People had heard of me through someone or heard me directly. and felt interested enough to contact me. It also resulted in a pile of referrals to me. So I can't overstate how important your reputation is, and not just your reputation for your work, the actual work you deliver, but how you do the work. And that seems obvious, but in dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs, both as people who are coaching clients as well as people I'm just involved in terms of a network, it surprises me at times how people set aside the importance of the relationship, no matter where you are in the client phase and in dealing with other consultants, because who you are precedes you.
So far we've talked about books, speaking, relationships, picking up the phone and calling people. Jennifer, what have we missed that you've used?
I would say that social media has been a sort of a leap step ahead for many of us, and was for me as I began exploring it, and still is. So when you asked the question about books, I was thinking that in general, writing and making that public is a great way to attract attention. For me personally, just to build on what Kellie said, in almost 30 years in business, IABC and my networks there, because that's been the network I've invested in the most, has given me about 90% of my business. And the two major projects I'm working on right now, I was just thinking as Kellie was chatting, one is for someone who at a totally new, who has been at 4 or 5 different companies in her career, and we've been working together for 25 years from way back when on an IABC committee. And so again, to your point, Kellie, about reputation, it's the way you show up on all fronts, not just as a hired consultant or supporter of some kind. It's the way you show up as a volunteer. It's the way you show up in your community. It's the way you show up in these kinds of situations and opportunities. I also took on speaking engagements, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger. I sort of challenged myself to find the topics that were of relevance to the audiences I knew had an interest in me, because of my my exposure. So those were some things that have worked for me.
The other thing I would add is, when you get hired, and again, it sounds so obvious, do good work. 95% of my practice is referrals to me and repeat business. So you do great work, then they want you over and over, and they'll tell others that they need you.
I have a question, and it's aimed directly at Jim Lukaszewski from Bill Spaniel. How has building relationships changed in the past 4 months or so, what with the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting. In my practice, relationships is an interesting concept, because I I only work with people who are in deep trouble. So they don't want to have a relationship. They just as soon not see me. The people inside the organization think I'm going to come and take it over because I want to go to work for them, which is the last thing I want to do. So for me, I would say of all the clients I worked with about 400 companies in 40 years, maybe a little more than that. And I know this because I was doing something for somebody else's book. I really only have relationships, I would say, with 5 of those people, from 5 or 6 of those, true relationships. All the other companies remember me, mostly because when companies get in trouble, they sort of like never stop being in trouble. So we have a relationship whether they want one or not, because I'm the guy the lawyers call when we did it again, kind of a thing. So relationships are interesting. The way I got my most successful way of getting business, I learned this in my career. I had a lot of nonprofit organizations here locally as clients, and I picked the really hard ones, or they picked me, I guess. But one was the Manufactured Housing Association. Well, these are the folks who manufacture trailers. Those things that attract tornadoes all the time. And I had a $5,000 budget for a year to accomplish one thing, and that was to ban the use of the word trailer in communication about the industry. They always call themselves the Manufactured Housing Institute or something like that. But the media always called them. In fact, when I met with them, I said, you can't make a budget big enough to change this because the word trailer is so attractive. So all my clients have been in peculiar lines of work, shall we say, and some of them are very mainstream, huge companies you all recognize, but they make mistakes. But the number one way I get those clients, which is I think what our audience is thinking about, was through public speaking, and that's the biggest change, of course. To get back to your question, what's changed for me? I'm not speaking to hundreds of people in person, sometimes thousands of people in person on a weekly or monthly basis. That's all really gone away. I'm doing webinars. I have one trade association that has 330,000 members in 180 countries. And so I did a webinar on crisis preparation. This is a 1-hour program last year. And this is a webinar that had 4,500 sites. Think about that. The average attendance at a site is about 4 people. So I had an audience that could fill a stadium on a webinar. So luckily for me, that's become the substitute for public appearances because we're not doing public appearances anymore. So it's doubly hard to get clients if you don't have access to platforms because of the other things we're doing, writing and publishing and stuff that make us visible in other venues.
Yeah, Jennifer and Kellie, I'm not going to ask Jim Schaefer because I know you're not currently working with clients. You're working on a book. But Jennifer and Kellie, what are you doing right now that you can't be out there speaking in terms of that relationship building?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to say the same to you. I'm still speaking on Zoom. I've done some IBC chapter workshops and development stuff. I've been invited to speak to a few client groups. And so I am still trying to deliver content in the ways that are available to me. And luckily for me, involved with a couple of big projects that, knock on wood, have continued through these pandemic times. Feeling really lucky and grateful for the clients that I have, and continuing to nurture new ones and longtime ones in all the ways that I can connect. But the switch to virtual has been fairly seamless for me.
For me,
I would just make a comment too. I've been publishing newsletters for years, and I'm referring to these older technologies, but I put out the newsletters on special topics now several times a month. I built an audience on LinkedIn of about 6 or I guess it's approaching 9,000 people. I have a private opt-in newsletter list, a blog list actually of about the same number. So I'm generating an audience of a pretty substantial size every month. Then of course you get the data back and you know who is how many openings and things that you have. I tend to look at the more important subjects to talk about from a crisis perspective. So I'm still out there. It's just that I'm not talking to people in front of audiences. And the benefit of the audience is that I tend to skip over all the barriers that companies and organizations use to keep from talking to people selling stuff. They make it really hard. But if I'm in front and I'm mentioning something the boss is concerned about, and some of the audience knows what the boss is concerned about, I get together with that boss, skip all the time-consuming, sometimes years, to sell a Fortune 500 corporation from scratch. You're probably looking at 4 to 5 years before you have any useful contact to the organization. And by that time, management is shifting, the economy is shifting, something is changing, the president of the United States is shifting, whatever. And it's very difficult. So the public speaking thing, together with newsletters that matter, has been a good combination for me just to stay visible and relevant all these years. I mean, I'm 78, and you should think I probably should quit by now, but it's just too interesting a life to let go of. That's all.
Shel, one of the things we've been talking about here is how do you get started with this, whether you're coming from a firm or toward a firm or doing your own thing. One of the things that I was thinking about this morning when I was out doing my early morning fast walk was a mentor that I had in Towers Perrin in Chicago. And I had never been a consultant up till that time. I had always worked in other organizations. And Kurt Snodgrass is his name. He's still in Chicago doing all kinds of good stuff, also a writer. But he taught me things like how to build, how to listen, how to empathize, how to solve problems with clients, how to create relationships, how to develop a value proposition, things like that, stuff that I'd never been introduced to. And the beautiful thing about it is that I had been with him, I was with them at that office for about 10 years before I went to Washington. And when I walked into the Washington consulting office at Towers Perrin, I immediately became Kurt Snodgrass, because I started teaching the young people there about how to do the fundamental things we're talking about, the building and how do you develop clients, how do you have lunch with a client, et cetera, et cetera. I think mentoring is a very important piece of this.
A question I wanted to ask is about a niche when you start a consulting firm. When I started, I think I was able to succeed because there weren't a lot of people out there consulting on that topic at that point. People really weren't talking about technology that much. The web was fairly new. Do you need a niche, or is it acceptable and easy to go out there and say, Smith and Associates, we do organizational communications? Kelly, let me throw that one to you first.
To whom?
Kelly.
You.
Oh, sorry. I think when you look at brand positioning and having your name associated with a particular area of expertise, I think that's always a good idea. I've chosen not to do that. My website has different tabs with the different things I'm involved in. So one is board governance, one is executive coaching, another one is Brene Brown workshops, and so on. But I think you need to have the clear area of expertise in each one. So my niche, if you want to call it that, with coaching, for example, is it's very rare to find an executive coach who actually was an executive. So that is one of the calling cards I have, and a reason that many senior executives have told me that they've chosen me. When it comes to business strategy consulting, which I'm also involved in, I was the executive responsible for business strategy and enterprise risks. So I have the deep experience and the ability to say that this is one of my offerings, and it's rooted in experience. So I think if you're starting out, it probably is best to choose a particular niche so your name becomes associated with that. If you already are established, as I was, and maybe a little longer in the tooth, I was 53 when I went out on my own, then you have the luxury of maybe having more than one niche.
I think that, let's face it, as consultants starting out, we will often, depending on the stage of your life and career, sign up to do almost anything. Plan the event. Sure, I can do event planning. Quickly look for the resources on how to put on an event. But as back to Kelly's point about reputation, and Jim, you've spent your careers on this. I think as you evolve that brand, it is important to have some keywords attached, whether it's, when I think of Kelly's name, I think of coaching and the Brene Brown stuff and all of that. Jim, same with each of you. I think for those of us who've been around a while, there are keywords that get attached to us. Those are often the topics you see us showing up speaking at conferences on. Shel, for you, for technology, you're kind of the shoe-in on that front. Heaven help you if you actually wanted to change directions. I don't think you'd be allowed to, because we do get a bit slotted into our areas of expertise. But I think it's fine to start out with with some of those generalist skills, and you follow the work and you follow the relationships, as long as you are clear about where you want those keywords to go and how you want to evolve them over the years.
I think it's I've always appreciated working with Jim because he always tells stories so well about what he's doing. And I mean, when I think about what my advantage is, having done this for this focused practice of mine for so long, is that when you get into competition for the kinds of work that I want, there's always the big firms there because they have armies of people ready to get to work on these projects. And I remember one of the first ones I went was a large pharmaceutical company, and they had just had a plant raided by the FBI. It's a whole other story, but anyway, and they were interviewing trouble counselors, and the guy who was in charge of public relations there is just a longtime friend of mine. We hadn't worked together much, but he did the product PR, and he loved it. The company saved lives every day, blah blah blah. But he called me and said, "Well, we had this plant raided by the FBI, and a bunch of something going on here at headquarters. You love this stuff. Why don't you come over and talk to the CFO, and they'll interview with the other clients?" So there was Hill & Knowles, and all the big firms were there. And I was the last one interviewed because the special committee of the board, which they set up whenever criminality is involved, it's a special group of people. They're board members, but they have special knowledge and special access and that sort of thing. So we get in the room. They have a packet I send out of information, and the first question was, "What is a Lukaszewski?" I said, "Well, you mean Lukaszewski?" "Oh yeah, what's that?" Because I mean, it was me. And he said, "We talked to Hill & Knowles, and we've talked to Burrs and Marshall, and we've talked to some European firms. Why are we meeting with you?" And I said, "Well, I'm happy to discuss my qualifications if you like, but I think the reason you're meeting with me is because I've been through this before, and I know who of you in this committee will be back here next year, and why those of you who won't will be. Which would you rather talk about, that or my credentials?" I got the it really, my job is getting people out of holes. Most of them have actually done most of the hardest work to get in these holes when they didn't have to, so to speak. And I've been in most of the holes and out of most of them, so I can pretty much scare the pants off of anybody with the stories I tell. And the interesting thing is, all my clients are confidential, so I'm not really talking about. I mean, they can probably guess at the companies, but the stories are interesting. And I think for management, it turns out that this kind of practice is the most intriguing for them possible, because they don't believe that it is going to happen to them. They don't believe it is happening to them. All these barriers are in the way, and yet they know they have to fix it or be gone. Or what most of them learn, they're going to have to fix it and be gone anyway. So, except that the thing that changed over the years of my work is you can be fired pretty easily as you're head of a company, but you never have to worry for fear, because they pay huge cash packages and wonderful benefits, whether you're successful or whether you're a failure. It's a great place to have an occupation, I have to say.
I just want to share a comment that an MC extraordinaire has shared here from Adam Brayford, particularly aimed at you, Jennifer. So you should be able to see that on the screen. A decision that I made when I went out on my own, I believe is the same decision that all of you made, and that is that it was going to be a solo practice. For me, the reason was that I had been a practice leader. That's the job I left with an HR consulting firm. I was the practice leader for the Western Region Communications practice. And before that, I had run a department. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to spend half of my time managing people. I also had a friend who had gone out on his own to develop a graphic design firm. I visited him several years later, and I said, "Show me something you designed." And he said, "Design? I haven't designed anything in years." He says, "I hire, I fire, I sell. I have all of these designers who work for me." I said, "I don't want to do that." I questioned that in the later years of my practice. I had not actually built something large the way some of my colleagues had. Is that a decision that you need to make when you go out on your own? You're going to build an agency or a consultancy or be a sole practitioner. Is that something you can decide later?
Well, what I did was, having been in a big consulting firm and having access to a lot of resources, what I did very early on when I started my own firm is I created 9 partners, or a partnership. They were not being paid. They were going to be consulting with me as I go out into the world out there. And we had people who were strong in finance, Roger Dupree, who's strong in many, many things, and about 7 or 8 other people, all with very special areas of expertise. They joined me only on projects. As I said, they were not weren't on a salary, but they helped me because I had a reservoir of skills and knowledge that I could take on my clients with me. They were benefited from it because they did get paid. So did I, and the client got the kind of expertise that he or she needed to be more successful.
In my case, I very deliberately wanted to be a solo artist. I was tired of, performance management and all that other jazz. But what I was most tired of was sitting in the boardroom for hours on end. I have taken on a few subcontractors here and there. You have to be super careful about who you choose to hitch your wagon to. So as Jim just mentioned, he was choosing well-established, reputable people with whom he'd already established a relationship.
Right.
It is so important because it's an extension of your own reputation.
Yes.
I have been surprised in terms of scale. I didn't initially plan to do a full-time thing, but like Jim L., I just love working. So I've ended up working full-time and earning more than I did as an executive. But one of the ways that I do it is I am very deliberate about pricing, about the type of things I offer. And I do a fair bit of speaking at no cost if I believe in the cause, or if I think it will reach an audience that is aligned with my brand. But for the most part, I really prefer being a solo artist. It's nice to have me as my boss, although my boss is a little bit optimistic as to how much I can take on at times.
I think I've been a solo practitioner all these years. And there are people that I will recommend to come in and do things, but I generally recommend them, and then it's the client's decision to hire them, and they always do. But we know how each other works and that sort of thing. And we don't necessarily have all that much contact. So, and most of them, some of them are from big organizations because they have special knowledge in the areas I'm constantly working in. But I've always been the Lone Ranger type myself. I've had Barbara, and I almost always have an executive assistant of some kind to help the publication work and the rest of that. But I think that's one of the issues we face in going into business. It's a very lonely business, generally speaking, and one of the reasons people leave it is because they somehow they thought they might meet more people if they worked alone, and it doesn't work that way. You just have to be comfortable being by yourself or being in a small group, or as Jim has done, build networks that you work with constantly. But that's not what I do. One of the reasons in my practice is different. I work with very large organizations. They almost all have skilled PR people in place. And the problem they're really facing is kind of my story earlier. They just have not been through whatever it is they're going through. And I've been there before. So my actual engagements are relatively short. Probably, I would say the average is about 44 hours, 50 hours. And then everybody, either they choose to do what I tell them or they hire somebody else. But basically, once they have an understanding of what they have to get done, then I'm really, in a sense, these are professionals. They know what they're doing. And this is just an area that they've got now familiar with. And then I come and go as necessary, but I don't necessarily, and sometimes it can be a year between my visits or my contact with these organizations. Because ironically, part of it too is because crisis management is really so much common sense. Half the time people say, this stuff you're telling me, Jim, sounds really familiar. And my response is, do you have a mother? No. And the answer is, well, why does that matter? Well, because she told you this when you were 9. She told you this when you were 13. She told you this when you were 17, and she told you this when you were 27. Now you're paying me to tell you the same thing she told. Well, my mother always got a big kick out of this because I would tell her, I talk about you all the time, Mom. It's so interesting. But it sounds weird, but so I don't need a squad of people to in essence, to judge what I do, so to speak. By the time people get to me, they've tried everything they possibly can not to do what they know they should be doing. And some lawyer says, do this or, the cops are coming or something like that. So I get attention. But as I say, it's not a way to build lifetime relationships because I know where all the bodies are buried. It's a different lifestyle altogether.
I want to share 2 comments here from.
I can certainly bet.
See, I didn't hear that.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh no, I was just going to say I can certainly bet most of us were better prepared for working during a pandemic.
That's true.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, that's definitely true. In fact, when we sheltered in place, I just moved right back into my home office that I had worked out of for 21 years. I want to share a comment, actually 2 comments from Chip Griffin. The second one will lead into the next question. Chip says the most important thing is to be clear with yourself about what you want. You can go from solo to agency owner when and if the time is right. But as Shel notes, the role is different depending on size. And I should note that Chip also does a podcast with Ginny Dietrich on agency leadership, that if you're interested in this on an ongoing basis, it's an excellent podcast to listen to. But his second comment is even solos need to spend time on sales management functions, though a lot of folks don't realize that when they get started. And that's what I'd like to get into next, because I know, Jim Lukaszewski, you mentioned that you weren't the one who did the adding, subtracting, multiplication, and division. Certainly wasn't my strong suit, but we do have to invoice. We do have to price our services. We do have to book travel. We do have to chase clients who are late with payments, make decisions about things like whether we're going to offer retainer services. How did you go about learning all that? I mean, these are not areas of expertise that we had when we decided we wanted to offer our communication skills as a consultative service.
Well, actually, this is where I found over the years that trade associations are great sources of information, and I learned about how to run an agency. I think we've been in business about 3.5 years, and we all of us probably have that box of stuff you want to read, but you never had time. So I took my box along, my reading box, and at the bottom of that box there was a big, thick, red binded book called "How to Run an Advertising Agency," and I was sort of fascinated by it. So I pulled it out of the box, started looking at it, and realized that this book answered all of the questions I had about that I'd forgotten to ask about running an agency of any kind. So we were there to be vacation, but I quickly pulled Barbara out of the sun, and we studied for those 8 days this book, and discovered that we were basically going out of business every day. We were charging too smaller rates. We didn't really have an organization for the business. Some of the things that some of our viewers are mentioning. So it is an organized process, and the PRSA and IABC have information that's available. But more than that, they have people available who you can talk to. And everyone has always been generous with me over the years in explaining how things work and that sort of, or getting me to resources. Jim mentioned running into someone. I've had several mentors in my career who came at the right time and were just extremely helpful in filling in the blanks about things. On this trip, by the way, we discovered that we had to triple our rates in order to stay in business more than another year or so. And it was when I returned, I visited every client we had at that time to bring them the good news that as of this month, we're going to be tripling our rates. And the first person I went to was the head of a bankers association, really nice guy, scared the heck out of me. Just he had a deep voice, and Jim, things are really serious here. And anyway, so he loved both of us, Barbara and I, and he would hand me the check personally every month. And I went to pick it up, And he would always say, "No, Jim, you take this directly to Barbara. No stops on the way, blah, blah, blah." And I was afraid in the first couple of years he wouldn't pay me. I would do something that he wouldn't, but he was always going to pay me. In any event, so as he was saying goodbye to me, I said, "There's one more thing I have to talk to you about, Truman, and that is we're going to triple our rates because blah." I told him the story. And he looks at me and he says, "Well, Jim, we've tried everybody in this market, and you're clearly the best. And even at your new rates, you're under the market for your skills." And I said, "Why didn't I raise my rates even higher?" But this is one of the key problems that most of us face with this question: how do you do it? But there's information available in whatever professions you serve. They have information through the trade associations. Generally, they're very forthcoming on these things, and there's a lot of how to do it stuff out there, and readily available. And people like us who are more than happy to jibber jabber about it with you if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, interesting. I think I learned an awful lot that when I was at Towers Perrin that helped me in a lot of other ways besides just working with the client directly. And you mentioned this a little bit ago, and that is, I had a person at American Express Travel who for 15 years was my travel guy. If I was going to go anywhere, I don't know, whether San Francisco to see Shel or somebody else, he handled all of my travel. I had a person here in Annapolis who was my driver, always got me to the airport, always got me home. Everybody in the neighborhood knew him. So I think what I learned with Towers was that there are resources available to us so that we don't have to be doing the non-consulting stuff or the non-revenue earning stuff. And so as a result of that, I think I carried that off with me, and it just kind of did the same sorts of things that I was doing with a consulting firm, but it was my own small firm with 9 partners.
One of the things that I learned early on, well, not early enough as it turned out, but I was doing okay bringing clients in. My revenue was fine. If I looked at my annual income, it was good, and yet I was struggling. And I remember talking to Charles Pizzo, who had been out on his own for a long time, former IABC chair, and was saying, "I don't understand. I'm making X amount of money, and yet I don't have any money. What's going on here?" And he said, "Cash flow is more important than income. You need to even it out, and the way you do that, at least what he told me, and it's what I ended up doing that worked quite well," he said, "you bill half up front." This was for speaking engagements and project work. If the project was large enough and long enough, I would split it into 3 or 4. But you don't wait until everything is done to invoice, because all of your work may be piled up in one window of time, and you've got no income coming for 2 months outside of that window. Is that the kind of thing that you learned on the go, or did you go into your practices knowing about that sort of thing?
Well, I knew about it because I was working with a big firm who also understood how to do that and taught me how to do that.
And I think as an executive, we worked with a lot of different kinds of consultants. So the notion of a retainer was something I adopted early on. With coaching, funny enough, you usually bill 100% upfront. There aren't a lot of services where you actually pay for the whole shooting match before you even get started. So I have a variety of things. If it's a speaking engagement, I invoice half upfront, as you mentioned, Shel. I have retainers, and some clients pay 100% upfront.
Let's switch gears. We have about 6.5 minutes left, and one of my favorite things to talk about when I talk about my life as a consultant was difficult clients. I think we probably have all had. I'm not talking about clients with challenging assignments. I'm talking about the client themselves are difficult. People who are hard to work with, who come at you with scope creep, expanding the scope of the project without expecting to pay for it, maybe even just demeaning and unpleasant. How do you deal with somebody that you have taken on that you wish you hadn't?
Actually, I get rid of them. I don't do that.
Yeah.
Early in my career, I worked for you took on anybody anybody who would hire you to pretty much do anything you could do. There's something about, especially when you're small, these angry people tend to find you somehow. You waste more time with these people, and you go home and you beat yourself up and you talk to yourself, why am I with this guy? Why can't he blah, blah, blah? I early in my career, I remember Barbara saying, so you like this guy, but he doesn't like you, or he doesn't respect you, or whatever it is. And the sort of the voice of wisdom said, what are we doing this for? I mean, we're doing it because we loved it. And so I just learned to get rid of those guys, because life was not worth it. Just not worth it.
Jim, I agree completely with you. And I can't even, I'm sitting here trying to think of an incident where I had that. And I think what happened early on in the relationship, as in maybe the first 15 minutes, it was obvious what was sitting across the table from me. And I just kind of backed off and let it go. And I can't think of a time where I had to fight with somebody or they were truly, truly nasty. I saw it. I think I always saw it coming, and I decided I was going to go home.
In my business, I actually have a form I send out to people when they call me and say, I send them right away and say, let's look at these 9 items. How many of these are you doing now or planning to do? And if they're not planning to do any, then we're not going to work together, because those 9 items actually are what they have to do to solve their problem. Somehow they think it can't be written down anywhere already. Well, one thing I learned about crises is they have fundamental commonality, and most problems are actually caused by intentional bad behavior or misbehavior. It's really what takes an accident in a business, for example, and makes it a problem and a crisis, because the people running the place suddenly decide they're going to invent stories and not tell the truth and all that sort of thing. These are conscious decisions by adults. And the way you solve those problems is by answering the questions and getting the truth out there and doing it today. So I sometimes I'll send this list, and then I remember talking to one CEO, said, Jim, we got a crisis here. We can't do 9 things on a list of paper. And I said, yeah, but if you could start them all this morning, and by the day after tomorrow, things would really be a lot better. Well, a year later, the new CEO calls and says, I got this list in front of me that my predecessor gave me, and said, maybe this guy can really help. Sometimes, it takes 3 years and 3 different people to finally recognize that this simple set of 9 steps is the answer to your problem, after they've hired a law firm after law firm, a PRF firm after PR firm. It's so interesting how hard it is to give good advice and have it heard. And if that's not going to be the case, what are we doing here? I tell you, there are lots of people in this world who act this way. It's one of our serious problems right now. That's why I wrote a book about decency. I mean, it's a problem. And we're just not paying attention to this anymore. But my recipe is really pretty simple. It starts with you and the life you want to lead, and the people you want to have around you, and the things you want to do, and go do those things. And then widen the circle, find others who want to be happy and have useful lives. A lot of times in our business, we tend to think we can change people. One of the reasons we like doing this is because we feel we can have an impact on them. But I found in my career that people do not change. If they're good people and want to get things done, it'll happen. Many times they just we have the pathways forward for them, which is.
And Shel's one of those guys. He's going to tell us 2 minutes left.
We're down to under 2 minutes. We have a question. I want to throw this to Jennifer and Kelly so that we can get this question answered from Bill Spaniel. Are large corporations better at paying on time than small businesses?
Or what? Say it again, Shel.
Are large corporations better at paying on time than small?
I love this question.
So, Jen, Kelly,
they have the money, so you want to work for these people, and they pay. They have all the money in the world. Literally, it's the tiny little clients who come along that Shel was talking about earlier that have the biggest egos and the biggest problems, and then they don't pay you on top of it all. If you start the relation correction and set up the pay structure that everybody understands, you're going to get paid, especially with larger companies, because they have processes to do this.
1 minute left. Can I get Kelly and Jennifer to weigh in?
Go, Jennifer.
I think Jennifer's got a delay here.
No difference.
Me either.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Same. If anything, the smaller ones tend to pay faster.
That's my experience because they are not on those 90-day
Great.
accounting cycles, which drive us crazy. We've got 30 seconds left, which is just enough time for me to tell you what's coming up next month on Circle of Fellows number 60. This is at noon Eastern time on Thursday, August 20th. The topic is brand development, and joining me for that will be Priya Bates, Neil Griffiths, Tasha Torrey, and Cindy Schmieg. So I want to thank everybody for participating in today's conversation. I thought it was terrific. I also want to make sure that we get a thank you into Anna Willie for all her behind the scenes work. And I've got another one of these starting right now. So I got to go.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Anna.
See ya. Take care.
Bye.